Justices at the Constitutional Court appear to be in the final stage of coordination ahead of the major ruling on the president. President Yoon will not be attending the ruling tomorrow. Voices grow louder from both pro and anti-impeachment demonstrators this evening as they gather near the court amid a heavy police presence. U.S. President Donald Trump has disclosed major tariffs on America's trading partners around the world, with South Korea being hit relatively hard with a tax rate of 26%. We take a look at how this country is navigating the escalating trade war. It's April 3rd, 8 p.m. in Seoul. This is Newscenter.
결연한 구국의 의지로 비상계엄을 선포하였습니다.
Thank you for joining us. I'm Yoon Jung-min. The Constitutional Court's ruling on President Yoon's fate comes tomorrow. The president will be absent. Our correspondent Oh Soo-young explains potential scenarios on Friday.
The fate of President Yoon and the nation hangs on the Constitutional Court's decision on his impeachment on Friday. The ruling will mean immediate consequences regarding the governance of the country, as the leader's removal or reinstatement spells out very different outcomes. If the court upholds the impeachment, Yoon would become the nation's second president in history to be removed from office, following Park Geun-hye's impeachment 8 years ago. Effective immediately, Yoon would have to vacate his office for good and leave the official residence in Yongsan-gu district. He would lose all post-presidential privileges, no pension, no office, no staff support, and no burial rights at the National Cemetery. His protection would be limited to basic personal security. With the leadership vacuum made permanent, Prime Minister Han Duck-soo would continue as acting president until an early election is held within 60 days. On the flip side, if the impeachment is dismissed with prejudice, it would mean the court has found the National Assembly's grounds for his removal insufficient, and the case is closed for good. After over 3 months of suspension, the president would immediately resume his duties. It's expected he'd then address the public through a televised message or press conference. His first tasks back in office are likely to focus first on foreign policy and national security, as there has not been top-level engagement with the United States since President Donald Trump's inauguration. Yoon would also begin laying out proposals for constitutional and political reform as pledged during his final court appearance. While his impeachment case would be closed for good, Yoon would still face investigations regarding his December 3rd martial law declaration, but during his presidency be immune from charges other than for treason and insurrection. Another scenario is the court dismissing the case without prejudice. The case would be dropped due to legal or procedural issues, meaning the bench decided not to rule on the grounds or evidence presented. The president would return to office, but the National Assembly could reattempt impeachment in the future. 6 or more justices must consent to uphold an impeachment. 3 or more justices deciding against impeachment would lead to a dismissal. While sources say the justices have reached an understanding on the verdict, they're likely to sign off on their decision at the very last minute, either in the evening before or early in the morning of the ruling. This is to maintain utmost confidentiality. The ruling takes legal effect the moment the presiding justice reads the decision on live TV. President Yoon's lawyers told press on Thursday that the suspended leader has decided not to go to the court to hear his verdict in person, taking into account the need to maintain public order and presidential security arrangements. In past impeachment cases, former presidents Park Geun-hye and Roh Moo-hyun did not attend their ruling sessions. Oh Soo-young, Arirang News.
Protesters both for and against President Yoon's impeachment have been rallying near the Constitutional Court in downtown Seoul for weeks. Let's turn now to our reporter Song Yoo-jin, who's been on the ground since early afternoon. Eugene, what is the atmosphere like there right now?
Right, Joey. So as I mentioned in our previous newscast, the atmosphere right outside the Constitutional Court is relatively subdued when compared to the intense demonstrations that took place right here in recent weeks. And that's because authorities have implemented tight security measures ahead of tomorrow's ruling. So to elaborate a bit more, this area within a 150-meter radius of the Constitutional Court has been designated as a so-called vacuum zone, a controlled lockdown zone for vehicles except police vehicles, with only pedestrians allowed within to minimize any disruption and threats to the court. However, I've been talking to some police officers over the past few hours, and access to this 150-meter stretch leading directly to the court's main gate, as you're seeing on the screen right now, is limited to court staff and only the press. And over the hours, we've also been seeing an increased police presence with more vehicles arriving and barricades being set up around the perimeter. But I want to mention that outside this restricted zone, the atmosphere is very different, because near Anguk Station, thousands of pro and anti-impeachment demonstrators are continuing to gather in larger numbers. And it's known that both sides will keep their demonstrations going throughout the evening, not only here near Anguk Station, but in other parts of Seoul, for example, in the neighboring Gwanghwamun Gate, as well as a presidential compound in Yongsan-gu District, Hannam-dong.
The demonstrations surely seem to be getting tense. And what can you tell us about how authorities are responding?
So public safety has been top of the agenda ever since the Constitutional Court announced that it will deliver its verdict, its ruling tomorrow. Just a reminder that back in 2017, when the court decided to uphold the impeachment motion against former President Park Geun-hye, 4 demonstrators were died during fierce clashes that erupted following the ruling of the court. So in response, from this morning, the police has issued its second highest emergency alert level, the Eulho level, among its 3-tier emergency response system, and this allows for half of the available national police forces to be mobilized. And in just a few hours, starting at midnight, that alert will be raised to the highest level, Kappo, which enables full nationwide police mobilization.
We expect a large turnout on the day of the ruling, and we'll do everything we can to manage the crowds and maintain public order. We'll take a zero-tolerance approach to any serious illegal acts, such as violence or destruction of property. We're also closely monitoring threats made online, and will respond swiftly to any signs of potential terrorism or intimidation.
So I want to talk a bit more about tomorrow. Tomorrow, around 14,000 riot police will be on duty across Seoul. Now, for your information, the Anguk Station, subway line 3, which closed a few hours ago, will remain shut. But it's not just a subway station. Schools, businesses, banks, and museums nearby will either shut down or switch to remote work for day. Now, with an estimated 100,000 demonstrators set to take to the streets of Seoul, the nation is on high alert, hoping to avoid any bloodshed in the big day tomorrow. That's all I have for now. Back to you, Tommy.
That was our Song Yujin live outside the Constitutional Court. Thank you, Yujin. Tensions are also running high at the parliament as lawmakers await in anticipation the verdict that also holds immense implications for party plans going forward. Our National Assembly correspondent Shin Ha-young reports.
Ahead of the ruling on President Yoon Suk-yeol's impeachment trial, the political standoff at the National Assembly continues, with rival parties holding different expectations for the outcome. The ruling People Power Party expects the Constitutional Court to dismiss the impeachment and for President Yoon to return to office. If Yoon is reinstated, the PPP plans to push for a constitutional amendment to fit present-day values. Yoon said earlier that he would not cling to power, but instead pursue constitutional reform. Interim PPP leader Kwon Young-se on Thursday reaffirmed that the party will accept the court's ruling and urged the opposition to do the same.
The PPP and I will accept the Constitutional Court's impeachment ruling and prepare for what comes next. We strongly urge the Democratic Party to deeply reflect on its actions and accept the outcome.
Kwon also urged the court to deliver a ruling that the public can accept to minimize conflict and confusion. Some PPP lawmakers decided to hold an overnight sit-in near Anguk Station, close to the Constitutional Court, until Friday morning. On the other hand, the main opposition Democratic Party argues that Yoon's removal is the only option, urging the court for a unanimous decision to impeach Yoon. The DP lawmakers have stepped up their protests, holding an all-night sit-in at their tent set up in Gwanghwamun Square for outdoor rallies. DP floor leader Park Chan-dae said there is enough evidence to prove Yoon's impeachment.
There is already overwhelming evidence to justify Yoon's removal. I have no doubt that the court will remove him from office for violating the Constitution.
While the National Assembly has tightened security, restricting outside personnel from entering the premises, both parties have ordered their lawmakers to stay on standby at the parliament this week. Amid growing political tension between the rival parties as the impeachment ruling approaches, there are calls for politicians to prioritize national unity after the verdict. 신하영, Arirang News.
The South Korean military is to heighten its surveillance posture against North Korea on Friday, the day of the Constitutional Court's impeachment ruling on the president. The Joint Chiefs of Staff says that it'll do so by expanding the operation of surveillance equipment, such as reconnaissance aircraft. Acting Defense Minister Kim Sun-ho is also to hold a key commanders meeting after the ruling comes out. As promised, U.S. President Donald Trump announced his reciprocal tariffs on America's trading partners. That includes a baseline of 10% on all imports and country-specific duties, with 26% for South Korea. Yoon has the details.
The 26% reciprocal tariff imposition on South Korea has become official as U.S. President Donald Trump on Wednesday local time signed an executive order imposing a sweeping reciprocal tariff plan. According to the panel presented by President Trump, South Korea would face a 25% tariff. However, an annex to the executive order later released by the White House listed South Korea's rate as 26% with no clear explanation for the discrepancy.
It's going to be Liberation Day in America, and it's going to be a day that hopefully you're going to look back in years to come and you're going to say, you know, he was right. This has turned out to be one of the most important days in the history of our country. God bless you and God bless America. Thank you, everybody.
Trump announced a baseline tariff of 10% on all imports, set to take effect on April 5th. Higher rates will be imposed on select countries, which he labeled as the worst offenders and are scheduled to take effect on April 9th. South Korea faces a 26% reciprocal tariff, higher than the EU's 20% and Japan's 24%. Major U.S. trading partners will also be subject to steep tariff rates, including 34% on China, which will come in addition to existing 20% tariffs on Chinese imports, for a total 54% tariff rate. In response, a number of countries have announced plans for retaliatory measures, signaling a global escalation in the current trade war. The European Union says it will respond through legal, legitimate, proportionate, and decisive measures. The Chinese Commerce Ministry urged the Trump administration to cancel the tariffs and said China would take countermeasures to safeguard its interests. The Canadian Prime Minister said Canada will fight the decision with purpose and with force, while Italy's leader responded by calling the tariffs wrong and not in the interest of either party. The reciprocal tariffs do not apply to certain goods, including semiconductors, pharmaceuticals, energy, or certain minerals that aren't found in the U.S. However, according to a White House official, Trump is planning additional tariffs targeting semiconductors, pharmaceuticals, and potentially critical minerals. Yoon, Arirang News.
For a closer look on what these new major U.S. tariffs mean for the local economy, our trade correspondent Moon Hae-ryun joins us in the studio. Hae-ryun, some 60 countries were included on that list. Give us some context as to how high the levies are for South Korea.
Sure. So in addition to the baseline tariffs of 10% that applies to all countries, South Korea is being levied an extra 16% as one of Washington's listed worst offenders on trade, bringing the total to 26%. To put this into context, this is notably higher than what many analysts had anticipated, especially given the existing free trade agreements between the two countries. The rate surpasses the tariffs applied to other U.S. allies such as the European Union and Japan, making it the highest among Washington's FTA partners. Experts say that this comes as a result of a high trade deficit and South Korea's tariffs on U.S. agricultural goods.
The U.S. appears to be focusing on the agricultural sector because it has a high volume of agricultural exports. Also, South Korea's trade surplus with the U.S. was originally below $50 to $60 billion. If a trade deficit with a specific country rapidly increases over a few years, U.S. federal law requires an investigation, and appropriate measures can be taken in response.
Other than the reciprocal tariffs that will be applied within the next few days, 25% tariffs on all vehicles shipped to the U.S. took effect starting at midnight in Washington and 1 p.m. in Seoul. This auto tariff rate is consistent across all countries, so South Korea is not being singled out in this sector.
And what has been the response from the authorities thus far?
So following the announcement, a series of high-level meetings convened between government officials and industry leaders. Prime Minister Han Duck-soo was the first to respond, calling an emergency meeting to conduct a thorough analysis of the newly announced tariffs and their potential impact. He also emphasized the importance of negotiations with Washington to minimize economic damage. The government then held a macroeconomic policy meeting presided over by Finance Minister Choi Sang-mok to assess market reactions and pledge all necessary measures to stabilize any excessive volatility, as the benchmark Kospi began trading more than 2.7% down from the previous session. Targeted support for industries most vulnerable to the tariffs was also outlined.
We will sequentially announce detailed support measures to counter tariffs, including support for industries expected to be affected, such as automobiles, and the expansion of refund guarantees for shipbuilding.
Meanwhile, industry leaders, government officials, and economic organizations gathered for further discussions on the potential impact on South Korean businesses. With the presidential impeachment verdict set for tomorrow, concerns have emerged over the absence of strong leadership to spearhead negotiations, raising uncertainty about the government's ability to navigate the crisis effectively.
And which industries could suffer the most?
So although auto tariffs are being spared the extra reciprocal tariffs, with around half of South Korea's exports to the U.S. reliant on auto shipments, these levies are expected to hit hard. Here's what an expert said.
Half of all cars exported abroad are shipped to the U.S., meaning Hyundai and Kia will take the biggest hit. In particular, Korea's GM branch, which sends roughly 85% of its vehicles to the U.S., is likely to suffer a direct blow.
And it's not just vehicles, but levies on auto parts too, that could lead to higher costs for domestic automakers. With the Trump administration also preparing to implement levies on other goods, including semiconductors, this could also be a cause for concern.
Many big tech companies, including Apple, as well as South Korean firms, have extensive production facilities in China, Vietnam, India, Malaysia, and Indonesia. Because of this, shifting supply chains in the short term is not easy. If the overall scale of ICT product exports to the U.S. shrinks even slightly, South Korea's semiconductor industry may also see a decline in exports.
With pressure mounting on the South Korean government to strike a deal to secure a deal or risk further slowdown in its manufacturing sector, a shift in strategy from pledging investments in the U.S. is needed.
All right, Hae-ryun, thank you for the report.
Thank you for having me.
Commemorating the 77th anniversary of the Jeju April 3rd incident, Acting President and Prime Minister Han Duck-soo says the historical event teaches the nation the importance of unity and co-prosperity. This came on Thursday as he visited Jeju April 3rd Peace Park to join the event's main commemoration event. He added that unless the nation overcomes the division between generations and ideologies, there won't be sustainable growth in South Korea. The Jeju April 3rd incident refers to what happened on the island between March 1st, 1947 and September 21st, 1954, as armed forces cracked down on civilians who stood up against the divided election of South and North Korea back in 1948. Official numbers from the official committee count nearly 15,000 deaths during this period. The government and the ruling People Power Party have announced support measures for the victims of the recent wildfires in the southeast. On Thursday, they said they will erect around 2,700 temporary homes for those who lost their houses and offer emergency financial aid. The party has requested an extra budget of 3 trillion won, approximately $2.3 billion to support small business owners and companies. In other story, the country's flagship mobility event celebrates its 30th anniversary. And innovative ideas were front and center at the show, covering land, sea, and air. Our Lee Soo-jin brings us this year's highlights for a preview.
At South Korea's biggest mobility show, the energy is electric, just like some of the cars on display. But it's not just electric cars being showcased at the 2025 Seoul Mobility Show, which is open to the public from Friday until the 13th. Marking its 30th anniversary, the event brings its theme Mobility Everywhere to life with a number of innovations that take to land, sea, and air. Hyundai Motor unveiled the all-new Nexo, a hydrogen fuel cell vehicle with improved range, alongside the facelifted Ion 6 EV for the very first time. Over in the autonomous vehicle zone, attendees can hop on a public transport shuttle developed by the Korea Institute of Civil Engineering and Building Technology. Classified as a Level 4 autonomous vehicle, it can drive itself along predefined routes and designated areas, while AI technology enables it to detect obstacles like passing pedestrians and adjust its speed to traffic signals. This smart public transit service, which can be hailed on demand like Uber, will launch in Hwasong, Gyeonggi-do Province next year. But the event isn't just about ground transportation. For the first time ever, visitors also have the chance to explore water-going vessels up close.
We chose to take part in the mobility show for the first time to showcase that boats, like cars, can run on electrical propulsion systems.
Local marine company Vincent's Epoch 2 is an electric leisure boat that runs emission-free for up to 3 hours on a single charge. And its smart interface provides real-time performance monitoring for safer, easier operation. Rounding up the diverse wave of mobility is Humble Motors Group, a domestic auto parts maker that has expanded into urban air mobility.
We believe the future of UAM lies in developing low-noise, high-energy efficient hybrid aircraft capable of navigating urban areas.
The company's flagship UAM models include the H-32, a vertical takeoff and landing aircraft featuring hydrogen electric propulsion and seating for two, designed for urban air taxi services. And beside it stands the B-22, an unmanned aerial vehicle optimized for logistics with its flexible payload options. With cutting-edge aircraft like these, as well as next-generation vehicles and vessels, Korea, the world's 5th largest automaker, is showing that it's well-placed to face future challenges. Lee Soo-jin, Arirang News.
The daytime temperature in Seoul rose up to 17 degrees Celsius today, feeling like typical spring weather. Tomorrow it will feel a lot like today, with Seoul rising up to 16 degrees. However, the temperature gaps between highs and lows are more than 10 degrees. Please dress in layers when you go outside to keep yourself warm. Meanwhile, the air has been dusty across the country. The ultrafine dust in Seoul, southern parts of Gyeonggi-do Province, and Chungcheongnam-do Province will be at bad levels tomorrow. Tomorrow morning, Seoul, Daejeon, and Busan will start off at 6 degrees, Gwangju and Daegu at 5 degrees. Highs will move up to 18 degrees in Chuncheon, Daejeon, Gwangju, and Daegu, 15 degrees in Busan. Rain is forecast all over the country on Saturday. That's all for Korea. Here are the weather conditions around the world.
That is Newscenter for tonight. Thank you for watching. A panel session up next.